You're bad. Work.
Back to work, guys. So welcome to the February 10th, 2004 City Council work session. I hope everybody has survived the weather that we've been through. And glad to see everyone. I want to say thank you to Chris for chairing the meetings last week. It was last week, wasn't it?
It was?
All right. So we're ready for...
A week before March.
Week before.
A week before March. Compress this together.
Okay, so we're going to talk about an important topic today. It's our next chapter in City Hall rebuild.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And before we get started, you mentioned the storm. I'll just mention, of course, we still have crews out there working, but I do think they did a really nice job over the last several days in, sort of our second big storm, which we're not always used to here, and a really nice partnership in coordinating, whether it's with our utilities or our schools or actually a variety of people within the organization, the community. So they've done a really nice job on that. And so I just wanted to pass that along.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to me that there was some of our recreation folks helped get people to
the hospital. It was pretty interesting because they are more used to driving in the snow, and so they were actually able to use some of our vans to transport folks, which was a nice partnership. Just as a point of reference from our dispatch center, on a normal Saturday, they would receive about 800 calls for service. They're up around 2,900 on Saturday. So it's a pretty significant uptick in all of those kinds of things. And so
I know on behalf of all of us, express our appreciation and gratefulness to all the hard work that everybody's had to do. And our folks, LTD, eWeb, all of them just working really hard everywhere to keep things moving. As I said earlier, I think we did better than, is it Georgia or Alabama? Atlanta. Right. Okay, and then I'm hoping this will be the last one. Can you just take care of that for this?
it'll be the last one probably in the next couple of days.
Until the next one.
Until the next one.
But we'll be ready for the next one as well.
Getting lots of practice. Okay.
And so then I'll turn it over to Mike Penwell, his team, to do an overview of where we are with City Hall.
Great.
Thank you. Good evening. Well, we've been very busy over the last few months. The project team has looked at just myriad options across the board on dealing with City Hall, always guided by your values developed by the council, coming up to those as a touchstone. It's really sort of ended up being an extended triple bottom line analysis, I would call it, because I think the council values are really rooted in that. Been a really interesting exploration. We keep coming back to the same recommendation over and over again, and that is that the existing building is too limiting in its existing layout. It's disconnected from the street, as you know. Energy efficiency is a real difficulty trying to retrofit the existing building. Seismically, the existing building is problematic. Accessibility, both physical and cultural accessibility, community connection, being able to get in and out of the building, feeling connected to the building on a community basis. Operating costs are more difficult, trying to maintain and reuse the existing. And surprisingly enough, the analysis indicates that the initial project cost of retaining the existing building is probably the most expensive option because of the amount of square footage that's dealt with. And so the design team will talk to you tonight about where the research and analysis has led. It'll lead to a pretty specific recommendation about mostly new construction. They'll talk to you about how to reuse the council chamber and what that means exactly. And we expect to have a good rich discussion about it. And then when they're done, they'd like to have the council go around with one round of feedback off the clock, just facilitated by the design team, before we turn it back over to the mayor for the usual 3-minute rules and that sort of thing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John first. Yeah, John Rowell from Rowell Brokaw Architects.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a while since we last met in October with you all, and then individually and in small groups later. And as Mike described, we've done a lot of work investigating the building and the site and the opportunities of the block. And we want to bring, what's exciting tonight is that we get to take the values and the goals we talked about together and bring some more tangible ideas to you. And we're not at the stage where we're proposing a design, but we're really talking about a framework for the block. We want to illustrate what that could mean. And then we have some questions about the council chamber and what it means to retain that element of the building.
And I think, as Mike alluded to, we, along with the policy team and the project team, have been doing a lot of work over the last few months. And the tagline that you see illustrated here on the title slide is something that is really going to govern the arc of tonight's presentation. Thinking big, this is really an opportunity to think about what this block could be within the city for the long term, beyond just the limits, if you will, of the size of this project. Start small. We know that there's a limited amount of resources that are available for the City Hall in Phase 1. We're going to demonstrate how that starting small can not be a limiting factor to the opportunities that the city has long term for the development of this site. And then make it happen. We're here to assure you that we are moving ahead on the schedule, and we'll touch on that schedule in just a minute.
So just to remind you all a little bit about these two tracks that we've been working along. One is what John and, I'm Karin Knutson, designer and project manager at Rowellbrook Architects and the project manager for Eugene City Hall Rebuild. Nice to see you all again. The two tracks that we've been working on, both John and Scott were just discussing the design process and the effort over the last 6 months to really look at a broad range of options that best carry forward the Council's values and the established goals and policies related to this project. Parallel to that, there's also been a public process which has really been about making sure that the community is well informed and up to date on this project. And it's been a great opportunity for us, for the design team, to hear from the community what they're excited about when they think of Eugene City Hall, how they would answer questions about what might make Eugene City Hall a place that they feel is welcoming and that is a part of their everyday life and a really important part of the way that the city functions and the way that they feel about the identity of Eugene. So we've talked to a couple of hundred people at this point, really in small group sessions, and there'll also be opportunities for additional input in a couple of weeks. We'll have a pair of open house events, one in North Eugene, one in South Eugene, that is really there'll be late afternoon, early evening events, a chance for direct informal Q&A with the design team to talk about the project and where things are headed. And we'll use the input from those conversations, from those open house events, plus what we hear from council today, the guidance that you give us, to inform where we are with a final recommendation and an actual design proposal for this project by early April. So tonight, as John mentioned, we're really talking about framework and what we've heard and what the values and the goals guiding the project are, what that might mean for thinking about the block and the long-term visions of the city. And then in April, we'll be looking at what City Hall might actually be like and a schematic design proposal at that point. So Scott mentioned the project structure, and just to remind everyone what is included in Phase 1, it's really 20 to 25,000 square feet, and also a framework for the redevelopment of the City Hall block. That has to do with the simple fact that the first phase space needs do not come close to filling the block, and so we need to establish a framework that really positions the city for an intentional and also agile and opportunity-rich future. The space needs that are included in the first phase of City Hall include the council chamber, the mayor's office, and city councilors' offices, city's manager's office, community meeting rooms, and also support space that allow all of those things to happen in a building. The budget is well set at $15 million and an $11 million construction budget. We know that it will be challenging to meet that budget, but we've been working diligently through the process with incremental cost updates to make sure that we're on track and that we're headed towards a feasible project and one that still captures the community's imagination. And then really what we're looking towards is something that in relatively short order is a current event and a reality. In Eugene, we'll be finishing design in 2014, and then construction will be really in 2015, with an idea of the building being at substantial completion by the end of that year, which is pretty exciting and not very long from now. Just also to remind everyone of the values that Council had discussed and established to guide this project, that these have been underlying all of the work that we've done and all of the conversations we've had with the community, that ideas about stewardship, identity, participation, simplicity, and a 50-year vision, Eugene at 200 years old, those are what are taking the project forward and that have been guiding the development of more concrete project goals. We've also been talking with with the community about these goals and about these tremendous opportunities to really establish a strong civic heart with the City Hall project and a place that has civic identity and an engaging, welcoming identity in our community, but that also is a place that is accessible and even loved by the people who come to City Hall and by the people who use it every day. A lot of opportunities here, and we can come back to an extended discussion of this, but we did touch briefly on the goals early on.
So back in January of last year, 2013, when Council directed the city manager to pursue the new City Hall on the current block, there were three things that were really pointed out, critical resources that needed to be retained and carried forward in the new design. The first is the existing public art, and we can certainly tell you that through our discussions with the many constituent groups around the city in that time, in the intervening time, that's a very important resource to the public and one that we are fully behind and will certainly be retaining and preserving those key pieces in the new project. The second is the parking, where it was identified that was a key city resource, and the direction was to maintain the existing parking to the extent possible. And I think you'll see in the scheme the framework that we're presenting tonight, that we have done just that. The third, of course, is the council chamber, the resource of the council chamber. Its iconic circular form within the square, the backdrop behind City Council, other attributes, and we'll be going into a little bit more detail on that piece of the project as we move forward. The team has also discovered that the building is ripe with many other resources. Just one that we've pulled out to look at, materials for reuse, as we're looking at sustainable strategies for the project, looking at capturing, salvaging, and reincorporating those materials that make sense in the project to reuse. When you look at the exterior wood slats of the building, there are over 30,000 board feet of lumber here, and this is all Western red cedar. And when you get past the cracking paint and some of the bolt holes, the image on the right shows the beauty of that wood. That's a significant natural resource that has both financial and cultural value that we see tremendous opportunities to reuse. So what we're talking about doing here is transforming, identifying what are the underlying values and attributes of those three elements, plus the other ones that the team has discovered, and looking for ways that we can transform those materials or those symbols or those values in the new project. And when we do that, we're really talking about sustainable design strategies. And of course, when you look at sustainable design strategies, energy efficiency is a key one. And I'm going to just take you through a little bit of maybe down in the weeds, nuts and bolts analysis to illustrate this point of being energy efficient, which of course aligns with many city policies and project goals that have been established. The existing building in this graph shows on the vertical axis what we call EUI. This is energy use intensity. That's a measure of kilobTUs of energy per square foot per year. And you can kind of think about it as miles per gallon. You know, it's kind of how you would look at a car. In the case of the car, the more miles per gallon, the more energy efficient. In the case of EUI, it's like a golf score. The lower is better. The existing building, when you're looking at the last 7 years of operation, that building averages about 130 EUI. Now, of course, that probably makes you have no frame of reference for that number right now. But that's obscenely high when you look at energy use in buildings. And when we compare that to a office building, a typical office building that has a year 2000 baseline, That's targeting a EUI of 75. So you're looking at an EUI that's significantly 75% above what would be considered a baseline building. And that 75 is even high because what we're trying to do as an industry now, and certainly many governments, including Eugene, are following suit, is driving that energy use down even further. So when you look at the target for the proposed building to really be in line with the sustainable strategies and the energy policies that the city has adopted, we really would like to be at about 40% of that baseline in the year 2016. This is all moving towards being net zero by the year 2030. So an EUI of 30, extremely low. We know it's possible. We just completed a building in Seattle, the Bullitt Center, that has an EUI of 16, one of the lowest in the country, in fact, even in the world. So we know this is an achievable goal. And when you look at the other impacts of that, energy costs money, and it's going to cost more money in the future. In today's dollars, just lowering the EUI on this project from 130 to 30 will save an estimated $250,000 in energy costs per year. So that not only has strong sustainable outcomes, it has strong financial outcomes as well. And this, of course, is all on the path to net zero. This is something that we and the policy team and project team have talked about, this project having the potential to develop or to demonstrate the city's commitment to sustainable design and resource efficiency. We believe we can move this project towards net zero, and we can talk to you again in more detail in April about some specific strategies for getting there.
And my name is Aidan Dunning. I'm with Miller Hull, the project architect. And I won't sort of bore you with all of it, but we've been geeking out as a team, making sure that our framework really sets us up for this success. There's a lot of strategies we can use that are no cost or very low cost, and making sure that we have inherent in our opportunities that we can take advantage of natural daylight and natural ventilation and all of those things that don't cost us any money as long as we have the building sort of designed right.
I need to introduce myself, John Rowell. Another connected opportunity of this project is really carrying on with the idea about using our resources and being wise stewards, is to think about sustainability from the point of view of how does the city contribute, how does downtown contribute to sustainability. And the idea of carrying on the work that council has done through partnerships to really make downtown a vital place, a place that people want to be, a place that's coming to life. And if we think about the block that we're working with, we have a long way to go to bring that to life. But that is a huge opportunity of this site. And it's not just about the block, it's about our surroundings and our neighborhood and the whole downtown. So we can have a big impact by contributing to vital streets, and we'll talk about how we can do that in this project. So stepping back and looking at what are the opportunities here, understanding the forces and the conditions of downtown. Just think about the exciting things that might happen at 5th Street and then connecting to Broadway, to commercial areas of downtown, the idea of connecting the park blocks to the river, and that we're already making steps toward that goal, and how being on 8th Avenue and fronting onto 8th, we have a key position in making that happen. And then looking at 7th as an opportunity to be visible. It's a street that most folks in Eugene travel down, so it's a place you can be visible to the whole city. And High Street being a little quieter, ideas in the transportation plan about perhaps a cycle track. It presents another sort of opportunity. And those 4 streets are really unique and offer difference and variety within this block. So if we think about zooming into the block itself, what do we do with this potential? And it's really great to have those 4 big connections in downtown. Thinking about, well, number one, let's activate 8th. If it's going to be a great street, it needs to be active. We need to find ways to make that happen. Let's make all of them need to be pedestrian friendly, but when we think about connecting 5th Street to Broadway, instead of getting in a car to drive 2 blocks, why not make it welcoming to walk? Make that really a pedestrian friendly edge. Thinking about the development potential of 7th, we don't know. That street will probably change over time, and along High, it's a quieter street. There's a different opportunity there. So stepping in and understanding how would we build a framework around responding to these forces, looking at starting phase 1 by activating 8th Avenue. Put a building that faces the street, has windows toward the street, has a door that you can see an entry from the street. Do the good basic things. Face this outdoor space south so that it has sun. Just make good moves so that this can work. And then when we think about, and again, phase 1 is relatively small, how do we think about the rest of the block and make an intentional future that's open to opportunity? To the north, when we've heard a lot about the importance of a civic heart in this project, that it have the potential to consolidate perhaps city services or at least build up to a really strong civic core. And then thinking about the element along High Street, and there's a great opportunity there to think about future potential on High, on 7th, and starting with a phase 1 that is really strong.
So formally then, to reinforce the ideas that John just mentioned, we're looking at how the program for phase 1, that 20 to 25,000 square feet, would begin to accomplish some of those things. We've talked to you before about this project being a chapter in a much longer book. That's the way we're looking at the framework scenario, that this is a really complete novel when you look at the whole plan. We're not writing the whole novel. We're not constructing the whole novel in phase 1. We're doing something in phase 1 that allows for that future development to occur. So looking at how we might accommodate the 20 to 25,000 square feet, we're looking at an east-west orientation of the building, which is a preferred orientation for natural light, for ventilation, and as John mentioned, maybe more importantly, for engaging 8th Avenue in that great street and creating a very vibrant and active open space in front of the City Hall. And then that framework allows for those future development both to the north and to the east to occur. Could be next year, could be 2 years, could be 5 years, could be 10 years. But the framework is established for that development to occur when the economic conditions are right and potential partners or the city has identified the best way to move forward with that additional land.
So another point that you asked us about, to come back to those 3 resources at the beginning, was the parking. And of course, the existing parking associated with the building, Eugene City Hall as it stands, is in a structured state. And this framework proposal would be to take the parking capacity out of that structure and look at new opportunity on the site for parking capacity. There's more than ample opportunity for parking associated with City Hall. There's no question that that the amount of parking that would be necessary to serve the needs of the building can be provided for on-site. There is also, however, the opportunity to consider the quarter block that is just to the south of Eugene City Hall, which is one of 2 city-owned surface parking lots in downtown, and that also could be a location from which parking for City Hall is provided. So really our high-level point in terms of thinking about this framework is that all of the opportunities that the city might need now and in the future are available, and that those opportunities connect to a strategic and incremental process of land banking and preparing for future intensification on the site or additional development on the site. You also asked us about the council chamber, and we had direction to retain the council chamber, so we wanted to spend a little bit of time now sharing with you some of what we've learned about the chamber, and also set up or queue up some of the discussion that we're going to have in a few minutes. Certainly. So you all know this room probably better than anyone in Eugene, and we've had a chance to talk with a few of you about its function. We've also spent a significant amount of time really trying to understand what the council chamber is, what does it mean to retain it, and we've learned some very interesting things in that process. 2 important points are that the council chamber has both iconic and physical elements, and that in understanding its historic significance, those 2 things can be thought of together, and they can also be thought of as separate things. And that we are very cognizant of the fact that the chamber needs extensive renovation and upgrades, that it's actually it wouldn't be possible to leave it as it is and not spend any money on that room or on that piece of the project. So based on that, there's really a high-level summary of the analysis that we've done, and that What that leads to is a conclusion that retaining the council chamber means in some way rebuilding the council chamber. And the reason that that is because buildings are made of structure and an envelope and mechanical systems and finishes, and spaces are held within them. We know that the building is seismically inadequate, that it has no mechanical system, that its envelope would not function to a code compliance standard, let alone the standard that the policy is, that the project is held to at a minimum. And we also know that the room does not function entirely to the needs of the community or to the bodies that are meeting there, that there are challenges related to entry, acoustics, technology, sightlines, security, and we would propose that those things be improved if we are planning for a city council chamber that serves the community for the next 50 years. We also know, and alluded to this I think earlier, that from our cost analysis that there's no savings associated with rebuilding the room exactly as it is. In fact, that may be a more costly trajectory because it's not possible to really do in a feasible manner. So it asks a question of what we would like it to be in the future, what could best serve the community in the future. So the proposal that we have arrived at, and this connects back to also the Chamber's iconic aspects, is that we both retain and build new. That we would be looking at retaining the iconic elements of the council chamber, which relate to an idea of it being a very democratic forum and a place that really brings the community together to gather and discuss and make decisions. That we would be thinking very carefully about the relationship between the chamber and the garden and the landscape that might surround it and the connections out to that landscape. And that we would also be looking for opportunities, of course, to repurpose the public art that is associated with the chamber and that many people directly associate with being in that space, and some of the other materials that we could find through discovery. And as mentioned, of course, in the process of doing that, we would also propose to complete some very needed improvements related to all of what I had just mentioned.
So let's just, retaining the council chamber, another question is, well, where is it on the block relative to the framework that we're proposing? And you can see that that's literally where it sits. It's elevated off the ground currently, and it fits within the Phase 1 framework proposal. And so how would we, if we literally retained it in place? Now remember, we've got to rebuild it to retain it. So how would we do that? Well, likely there would be a bar of space that would be an entry, a public entry, city manager's office, the other elements that would create a connection to the council chamber in its current location. And this is doable. I guess the question is, if rebuild is a reality and you're not saving money, what if you put the council chamber in a place that was, and we've heard a lot about this, making the city hall more accessible, more welcoming, and bringing the city to the people and making that visible. So what would it mean to take the council chamber and build it in a location that is really moving it forward, moving it to the public realm and making it visible? And we think this is a strong option, and we want to discuss this, though, because you asked to retain the council chamber. You can see that there's more nuance to it than and opportunity there, so we really want to explore that in our discussion with you. Now, when we step back and you look at these boxes, you might wonder, well, what's it like on the ground? You know, what does it look like? What does it mean to really experience this? And we're not designing City Hall yet, but we knew that you'd want to see some pictures of, well, what could it be like? What might this look like from above, from the street? And we're just going to show you a few sketches of what this could be.
So I think we'll start just right at City Hall and right at 8th Avenue. You can, the great street there. You can see how that space can begin to continue the vibrancy and the active life along 8th as it marches from the park blocks to the river. That space can engage the front of City Hall. City Hall can have an active and civically appropriate presence on the street, providing both views into council chamber, access into the building itself, which of course then provides access to the various programmatic components that are within the building. The building itself is relatively small, 20 to 25,000 square feet. What you're seeing here is an idea of inflating the scale, if you will, of the building along 8th so that it has a very strong and bold civic presence, even though it's a relatively small footprint within the city. You're starting to see ideas of expression of that council chamber, both through the roof plane and then also visible out to the plaza and to the corner at 8th and Pearl. You're also seeing ideas of potential PV panels, photovoltaic panels, to begin to move the building towards net zero, either in initial phases or certainly PV ready if those panels aren't able to be accommodated within the initial budget of the project.
And, we've called this Think Big. So when we say think big, start small, Think Big is looking forward to a future that could mean consolidation of more city services on the site. And the idea of this element to the north, it's hazy because we don't really need to get into a lot of detail on that, but the potential is there to do that along the east edge of the site, along Pearl, to introduce other uses that might bring a mix of uses and certain urban vitality to the site. So we think it's exciting to think about the framework creating opportunities. What they are, and specifically, we don't know, but we want to set up a good foundation for that for the future. And so think big. Where do we start on this? We want to start with something that meets the budget, that's realistic, that we can deliver on in the time frame, and deliver on the central goals of the project of establishing a strong civic heart, making a building that performs, bringing the council to the public realm, making it accessible, bringing this to the street level so that we don't have ramps to approach the building, and then thinking about the remainder of the site as a land bank and looking at, especially that north edge of the site along 7th, as really providing more than enough parking for the building. It can also serve the surroundings, and this would be done to current city standards with the water treatment and the proper landscape setbacks and so on. So finally, moving right down to street level, flying around as a bird looking on top of roofs, what would it be like? What could it be like at street level? And this is just a concept sketch. It's, as we said, the design is coming and it's just ideas, but the important things are to make, we think, to deliver on the goals are to make a building that is transparent, that has openness, that is welcoming, that you can see what's going on, you can approach it easily from the street instead of being hidden or disguised, that it's out in the open and it's very visible. And so that idea that Scott was talking about, that it, even though it's a realistic and relatively small first step, that it stands up and makes a strong statement as a city hall. And then you see off in the distance to the right and to the left the idea that in future there are all sorts of exciting opportunities on the site, which could be consolidation, it could be a mix of uses. So we wanted to end with just coming back to what we're recommending and beginning a discussion on this. We're talking about a framework that identifies a clear site for phase 1 that we know we can deliver on budget and we can achieve the goals, and then thinking about over time a framework for redevelopment of the site that is open to opportunity and really is exciting, that sets a clear course but is flexible and agile. And then thinking about the council chamber as a really important iconic element and what it means to retain that and retain that history, and what elements of that we're really recommending bring forward the elements of democracy and gathering and the way we come together in Eugene, but thinking about making a council chamber for the next 50 years. And given what you've learned about this, understanding what we've learned, that we have an opportunity here to maybe get the best of both. So we have a few questions for you, and then after that, turn it over to more Q&A with the mayor.
So I think in terms of format, what we were hoping is that we could just ask a couple of direct questions of you all and have, I think, a round of 3-minute feedback from all of the members of the council. And then after that round, if there are still questions and time for discussion, we'd like to turn it over to the mayor to moderate additional Q&A, and we're happy to answer any questions or provide any clarifications that we can. But the two questions that we would like you to consider and give us your input on have to do really with the framework and the council chamber. And the first question is that really we'd like to hear your thoughts on the framework and that how you think the proposed framework meets the current and future needs of Eugene City Hall, and how you could also see it reinforcing the council priorities downtown. So basically, opportunities on this block reinforcing other big picture goals that the city has and the role that City Hall can play in advancing those goals. The second question has to do with the chamber, and given what we've learned about what it might mean to retain the chamber, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about how it could more actively connect with the public that it serves. And we could talk about that in terms of location or function or particular aspects, but we would really like to take that direct input into this next cycle of design.
So what you've asked for, as I understand it, is to not use the timer for this particular part, but we'll just go around the table, right?
That'd
So
be
we'll
fine.
start with Alan.
Great presentation. I really like what you've done, and I really like the concept. I like the framework. I love the reuse capabilities that are there. I like the bigger picture about how it sits on that block, and that it's I like the open transparency of what you've been talking about, especially smart about doing the energy efficiency and the net zero buildings. I've been saying that for a long time, but I think that's really, really key because we're operationally dollar constrained, not capital constrained as much, and I think that's only going to get worse. So getting a building that's cheap to operate is very important. I think we've got the right mix of things in there. So all of that, I really like it a lot. I don't know what agile and intentional means, though. But, as far as the chamber's concerned, the reason I supported initially the chamber being retained was because I think what we do here is we don't respect and we kind of trash our history. The exterior of the building with the fur coat around it has no value to me. It's an impediment, and it also is a really bad building from a lot of perspectives, and I don't care about that. But retaining the council chambers was a throwback to history for me. It's throwback, respecting where we've come from, and having it be exactly where it is and exactly how it wasn't my intention, but retaining that. It was important in its essence, but not in particular. I think it was a very problematic building, the way that it's constructed and the way that the space gets used, and having it become more technologically advanced, and all those things were very problematic in the way that it's designed, especially that interior fur coat that it had was, I thought, kind of odd. But and then from an energy standpoint, it's just basically a wall of glass, and we all know it was almost impossible to keep cool or hot depending on what time of year it was. So having it be incorporated into a new thing like you're talking about really makes a lot of sense to me, but celebrating where it came from, I think is real important. And I also very much agree with the resources to retain, the public art, the parking, and the council chambers are the right three things. And if we can reuse as much as possible, that would be great. Even things like when they built the new U of O arena, I think they recycled 99 or 98% of that old factory, bread factory, the Williams Bakery there. So I think that is a real important thing to consider as we move forward, too. And I'm glad to hear that this can all fit within the budget. Next.
Take that away from you. Okay. Well, for one thing, I was struck by your saying something about acoustics. The acoustics in the council chamber were much better than here. We could hear people, they could hear us, we could hear each other, and I think the chamber is really, well, I would have liked to retain the whole building, actually. I consider that a work of art and something that we could, and still not convinced that we couldn't repair more cheaply than to demolish. But I think the council chamber as it is, it's really just it's really democratic. The roundness and the fact that you can see out and that people outside can see in. And I think it's very accessible and open. Yeah, and it could use a restroom, I suppose, but I worry that we're going to end up with saying we'll just keep a picture of it or something like that, which is what so often happens to places. I know a shopping mall that they call White Oaks because it used to be an oak forest, and there's not a tree anywhere. I've never understood why we didn't use the space of the fire department when they left. We always said we need more space, and the fire department left, and we didn't use the space. Police left, we didn't use the space. I don't know why. But are you thinking of surface parking on 7th Street? You said surface. You said parking on 7th. I assume you're thinking of surface parking.
That's correct,
Yes.
yeah.
I think that the closed parking that is much better than more surface parking. It's the cars. It's better to not have the cars out in the open. We have too much surface parking. It would be better if it could be upstairs hidden by something, if there was such a thing, or under. But I don't understand why you couldn't leave it where it is. And I wonder if anyone's thought about how much it would cost to just reinforce to make it earthquake safe and a heating system. Alan just said the heating and cooling was terrible in the council chamber. It's terrible here too, but I think what we need was a new heating and cooling system rather than a new building. And that's all I have to say.
I think you guys have done a wonderful job in terms of the presentation, so I commend you on that. I don't want to get too deep off into the chambers right now because I don't have a lot of ideas formed around that, but what I'm more or less looking at is how the public will engage the space as they approach the space, as they interact with the space. And so I've got 3 points I'd like to see us try to look at. One is to expand the art platform of City Hall that would include youth art, as well as art from seniors, from people from all sorts of backgrounds that really reflect the diversity of the community. I'd like to see a playground. If we could develop a small playground so that it would be actively engaging, our families as people come down to do business with the city, very often people will take their kids. And, it would be a great place for somebody to stop off, have your kids be able to play, maybe take a sack lunch, have some benches in there where folks can read. Just kind of giving that park-like atmosphere as you come into it that gives it a much more welcoming feeling, less institutional, is kind of the vibe that I'm going with here. And then I'd like to see us do something in terms of displaying city history. It's very often, when I come around the community, I don't see a lot of history displayed, and I like to see that done in a multimedia fashion so that we can take advantage of the technology that's out there, kind of like, some of the museums that I've been in, the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, where, you go in, there's a multimedia display, there's also several other displays that talk about the history of the civil rights movement. I think the history of Eugene would be something that if we put that on display, we can engage future generations of school children that can come down, can, look at that and can get a sense of where they live, how the community started, how, what is Eugene all about. And being in education, that's something that we don't teach very well. We have not taught the history of Eugene. And so, that's something that's lacking, and I think that this space can provide an opportunity for us to engage that history and to get our young people engaged in that history, as well as other people in the community who don't know about the history of Eugene. And it would also serve as an attraction point for visitors that are coming into the community as well. So I'm looking at this as a more broader kind of visionary thing that, you know, we're not looking at this as just an institutional facility for people to come in and transact their business with the city, but that it becomes a place where people can really actively engage the city in a way that is meaningful, so that you come away from City Hall with a more meaningful experience than paying a parking ticket, for example. But you do that in municipal court anyway. That's the whole other deal. So, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's spurred a lot of questions for me, and I won't ask them all right now because, you know, we're not. These are just like preliminary sketches. I'll try to answer at least one of your questions that you had for us. I kind of like, you know, as far as the council chambers, I see in all of your drawings that you've moved them. That surely will be a large expense to move and reconstruct, and in addition to the cost of refurbishing. Personally, I like the chambers where they are. I really like the little garden around it. The water feature has big problems and needs to be redone if we decide to keep it. But, I mean, they are repairable. I don't know if we want to do that, but I think that we should. I just love the garden space, and I'd rather see the chamber where it, you know, leave where it is, just make it earthquake proof and energy efficient. I think that's one of the options. And then build the other, you know, the rest of it in a way that allows for better opening, perhaps a diagonal opening at 8th and Pearl, to make it, as everyone's saying, more accessible. It's kind of, you know, this like fortress-like structure now. And that could be, you know, go along with this plaza area that you've shown up here. And I wonder about not having parking underground. It'd probably be okay the way these drawings show the first couple of years, but I mean, eventually when we do the future reconsolidation of all the other departments, I think that's where we're leaning, is to bring everyone back, except the police, you know, to this site. Parking's going to be an issue. I know we're encouraging public transportation and bike and pedestrian and all that stuff, and but you know, people are going to be driving for the near future anyway, and so you know, I just hate to see us come up short on parking space. So I don't know. I think those are to some of my comments so far. Thank you.
Yes.
Functional and symbolic. I don't think you have to have one at the expense of the other. I think you can have them both. And I think what you're trying to get to is something that is both functional but also is symbolic of what Eugene wants to say about itself. For me, retaining the council chamber was a symbolic act. It said we honor, as Alan said, the past, even as we look forward to what we want to be in the future. The current City Hall, as you pointed out, and it was one of those walk away with aha moments, the current City Hall was built in an era when government was turned inward. It's enclosed. When you look at it, it's not inviting. You have to go inside to the Holy of Holies in order to access government. That's not what government is today. What we need to say about government today is that is it accessible to the people. It's at street level. You can get in easily, and symbolically, that is what Eugene is. And so being able to utilize the current council chamber in that configuration, I think, sends an enormous message about what Eugene considers itself to be, that government is not separate and unique and above the people. It's with the people. It's part of them. So whatever that configuration is, I agree with that 100%. Whether moving it is the best way to do that or not, I like it where it is, but I'm intrigued by the idea of moving it, because if that makes it more accessible, then that's an important thing to do. Some people talk about City Hall as being ceremonial. Why do we need to do it? It's just a ceremonial building. I think that creates the impression that this is an unimportant building. We don't need it. It's negligible. It's ceremonial. It's unimportant. I think you could be further from the truth. The administrative and governmental function of this city is fundamental to its purpose. And the seat of government in Eugene is an extremely important function. It is by no means ceremonial. We make the decisions that benefit and run this city from that seat of government. It is not ceremonial. It may be small, but it's critical. And for me, that is where the functionality and the symbolism come together. That flag is a symbol, but it doesn't render it irrelevant because it's an important symbol. And I think this building can be just as important symbolically. But I don't want to sacrifice the value and the functionality and the effectiveness that that building can represent in the name of symbolism. I think they are not mutually exclusive. We can have both. I think what you're struggling to do is to find that. And we're not far enough down the road to know whether we've achieved that yet. But I'm impressed with the effort you're trying to make to find that balance between the functionality of the administrative seat of government for this city and the symbolism that that represents. And so I am a firm believer that we need to do this, not for ceremonial purposes, but for the functional purposes of this city and all the symbolism that represents. And to me, that is no small thing. That's an extremely important thing. So however we need to situate that, those are the values that I want to see most, that functionality and that symbolism. And I think the turning outward is one of the most important symbols that we need to show, that this building is for the people, not just for us.
So first of all, I just want to say that I really appreciate the strength of the building that you're, I mean, it is a small footprint, and you've given it some strength and purpose in how you presented it, and I appreciate that. I think it's really important. I also appreciate that you're trying to make us walk our talk with it, and so I think that's very important as well. I appreciate the historic connection that everybody else has spoken about, and I'm not wedded to where it ends up being, but I think the historic connection is very, very important, and how to do that in a way that really works with being in a different time, too. I differ with Chris on my feeling about the way the current building is, because I think that one was in its time was extraordinarily innovative, because the whole notion was that you didn't have to go through a doorkeeper to get to City Hall, that every part of the city would be open door to the public to enter freely, not have to go up flights and get your pass to get to it. So I thought that was the virtue of the fact that it was trying to symbolize, this is your government, you can get into any part of it, it's just through that door. No password. So how to keep that sort of energy as you go forward, and this is really important to me. I love the plaza part. I did want to say that I thought, because the arts part, you've talked about preserving arts, but I hope as we think about it, we'll think about the connection with the shed across the street and all the other things that are going with the arts community that we want to be part of. So it isn't just what we have that we're trying to preserve, but how we build something in it to add to what we want to be as a city that's important to me. And connecting that part as well as the vibrancy part seems really important. So I'm a little worried about the parking deal, because people could kill themselves to get underground parking, and we're about to talk about jettisoning underground parking, so that does worry me. Are we going in the wrong direction with that? And I understand some of the pulls and tugs. The other part for me, honestly, is I know you've got this sort of the misty picture of what we might have out in the future in addition to this beginning, but I also think we ought to sort of separate it and say, we'll have another discussion about how we use the property in the interim, because I think it has to have, even though we can't afford to do anything fancy with it, it has to look good. It has to be meaningful in the time that it is what it is while we're waiting to get to the next phase. It shouldn't look like we're just plunk something over there to occupy the space. So it's like a whole nother discussion to me about if we choose to build on this part and that leaves this part, what are we going to do with it to make it something within our ability to make it something good for our community? That's my thinking. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think you guys have taken a very creative approach to a set of challenging goals and the various values that members of this council have asked you to consider. So I really like kind of where your thinking is going and how you're trying to approach this in the broadest sense. I am not one of the councilors who had a big value around retaining the chamber or any part of the property.
Here, here.
So, I'm good. What I wanted was the openness, was the face to the street that was more welcoming than the one we have now, and I think you're incorporating those things into what you're showing us here. And I'm not surprised to hear you say that trying to retain the chamber in its current form is very, very challenging and probably not practical in terms of what our parameters are. So I think moving it closer to the corner is a great idea, but also I could see it being in the center of a wing. Wings on either side might be another approach, depending on what other input you get as you go forward. I did wonder about the parking trade-off. Putting a whole new slab of street-level parking, does send a mixed message from some of the other things we're trying to do around the community. It may be impossible to retain the underground parking and bring the building down to street level at the same time, but, that might be something else to revisit. I really appreciated Greg's comments about public art and historical context, and I think in terms of thinking towards the future and also how to create a great street, those are the kinds of ideas that, as Councilor Evans already said, can create a destination for City Hall beyond just coming to deal with city business. Could be a stop on a tour of downtown to visit the artwork and historical information that's there. I think that's a very exciting idea, as well as the idea of creating kind of a community commons where folks can just come and be and relax. I am a little challenged by the idea that City Hall will be 1 or 2 stories and surrounding buildings around it might be 5, 6, 7, 8 stories. I think that starts to diminish City Hall in a way that might not make me as happy about that. On the specific question about how to more actively connect with the public, one thing that we've experienced in this chamber is we'll have a public comment session, and then folks will be leaving that while we're trying to continue our business, and they'll be speaking to one another as they exit the room. So thinking about some kind of vestibule, perhaps, where folks who've come to make that kind of comment can have a place where they can debrief and still be out of the elements, but not within the chamber itself, so we can continue to do the business of the city. And I'd be perfectly happy not to have the mural retained behind the seating at the council. To me, that's kind of like redoing your whole house up to modern specs and keeping the old flock wallpaper on the living room. So that's just my personal opinion. I understand that it's got value to other folks, but if it was to be retained in some way, I think some kind of information about it. I don't know if there was an information plate about it in the old chamber, but some context for why this piece is still in the chamber, I think, would be valuable. So those are my general thoughts right now. Thank you.
Well, I'll get to that part at the end. I liked what Chris said, functional and symbolic. I think this group has made a lot of things functional. I think the staff have, and I don't think we have as much trouble with that. And I frankly think we ought to spend more time focusing on the symbolic part. I think that part's pretty important. For me, there are a lot of places, like if you look at the State Capitol building, the marble and the essence of it, it's very timeless because it's stately and it's institutional, and I like that. So, I don't mean to disagree with my friend, but I like that very much. I think that does an important thing that's symbolically important for me, which is to honor the people and not the leaders that work there. that, for me, is critically important. I love the transparent idea with the glass on the outside, that it's accessible. I love that very much. Could you throw the first slide up here so I can show you something else?
Which
Possible to throw that up. The very first slide, the cover slide.
One return.
I want to show you something. Notice this. I, like Claire, had a different opinion about the best location for such a building. And if you look at the far left, you're honoring something that's important to everybody by even putting that river up there. That, for me, was critical. The building itself right now is surrounded by a water feature that never worked, or didn't work well. And I think that's critically important, some manner of water feature, because it's one of the things all of us in this community, whether we agree on anything else, that's one of the things that all of us value. And I think that's important. So I saw in the drawing piece here, it looks like you kind of have some manner of pond sort of looking. I think you started to capture that, and that's good. I think that's a symbolic piece that really, really matters. I'm having difficulty understanding the concepting of whether we're talking about entirely rebuilding this chamber or saving part of it. I've heard really different things in terms of the expectations of some of my colleagues based on what they heard from me. I think some of them assume you're saving part of it, and some of them assume you're entirely rebuilding it. And I'm, at this moment, not sure what that answer is either. For me, I like the essence of the room. I like the essence of how it's the round presentation. Like Alan, I didn't understand the first things on the inside of the room. That never made much sense to me either. But please, I'll go stronger than Claire, for the love of all that's holy, get rid of the mural behind the thing. I mean, if we have to keep it, fine, make it seat covers, I don't care. But just
Don't make you the archer.
That's the hideous thing. Okay. It's hideous. There's a very big difference for me between the importance of public art and public history now, too. Especially as it pertains to the chamber. I'm not particularly wedded to any of the public art that's there. I know it's important, and we should absolutely be careful to care for it and respect it, but there's none of it that I revere when I see it. I certainly don't with the backdrop. But there are the cases in the back where we've got gifts from Sister City things that are there. We've got some history pieces. We have plaques on the back wall of previous mayors and previous councils. For me, that's the piece that really needs to be emphasized more soundly than we have in the past. Claire made a great point about the kind of vestibule lobby idea. If you go to the state capitol, one of the things you notice is that in that lower area between the chambers and by the gift shop and whatnot, you've got history all over the place in pictures and paintings and descriptions, and the building burned down twice, and here's what it looked like before, and you've got other things that belong to all of us in that space. And I think that's really important for us to draw more from. We need to do a much better job of celebrating the stuff that belongs to all of us. There are some really good books. The McCornack sisters wrote a wonderful book about the first 100 years of the city of Eugene that's just chocked to the gunnels with all kinds of great stuff that would provide stories and opportunities. I'm sure there are artifacts everywhere that one might find from the History Museum or otherwise that would help support some of that information. So I'd love to see more of that. And then, let's see here, one more note. Yeah, that focus on what kind of message do we want to send with the building, it being something that celebrates the people, all of us, what's common for all of us, rather than, the raised platform. I don't care about that. Let's see the stuff that celebrates who all of us are. I had a lot to say there, brother. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't. The framework part, what the process has been so far has been excellent. I think you're right on target. I think covered everything that the council has asked for, as far as the information, as far as thinking ahead, et cetera, et cetera. As far as the actual change, how can more actively connect with the public, I like the open design, the ability of someone to just basically leave the sidewalk and be into the building. Now, as far as the parking, my understanding on this last sketch, that parking, it was just kind of a temporary parking until the rest of the property is designed out or built out. Is that my understanding? So it's not a permanent. I'm okay with doing that. I think that it's important that the new City Hall be designed with the maximum efficient use of the property, and also looking in the future to develop the rest of the property. In our meeting before, I think I said not only be able to build out, but also build up, and I understand that is possible. As far as the underground parking, the sketches up there with the plaza area to the south of the building, maybe we can incorporate a grassy knoll leading to the entrance and then still be able to use some of the underground parking. I don't know if that's
Maybe a different term.
Just thinking.
Yeah, just tossing things out. And then the other thing, as far as the interior of the council chambers, it has to be multi-purpose, not only for the council, but also for the staff that supports us, because people probably don't realize how many hours the city manager support staff spends moving tables around between our meetings. Even when we were in the McNutt room, they had to move tables around and get on their hands and knees and take cords down and things of that nature. So it's very important that we design the new City Hall, not just for how the council conducts its business, but for each and every employee that's going to be working in that building, and for them to be able to get around and do their job with the least amount of obstructions and the best use of their time, because after all, the taxpayers are paying their wages. And also for the people coming to the City Hall to conduct their business. It needs to be easy for them to enter the facility, and if they have something they need to take care of with the city manager's office or the councilors or the mayor, whatever, to be able to walk in, find it, do it, and be on their way. Oh, the artwork. I know there's some history to that artwork that's up in the old City Hall, and if it can be preserved in some way, that would be fine. At one of the business-to-business expos that the Eugene Chamber of Commerce does, I think Jan had it. There was a
backdrop of the city.
The backdrop that we used at that meeting was a skyline of the city, and it was absolutely gorgeous. So something of that nature, whether it be in place of the artwork that's up there or maybe across the front, I don't know, but something like that, a little bit more modern, might kind of pick things up a little bit.
So just real quickly before I turn it back over to you, Mayor, there are just a couple things that I wanted to touch on real quickly. One around the council chamber. The question was ambiguous because we wanted to hear what you thought about retaining versus new and what your values were. So I think we got a lot of input, good input from that the design team can use. And I just wanted to touch on the parking real quickly because I'm used to working on three-dimensional projects. This is truly a four-dimensional project because it's got the aspect of time. And the time piece is the piece that I find that people have the most trouble wrapping their head around. And one of the reasons that parking was addressed in the way that it was very specific input in terms of parking. It's a revenue producer to have on-grade parking, whereas structured parking is a revenue loser. So as a temporary use as a step toward a future use. On-grade parking that's revenue positive seemed appropriate. We also got input from developers that that's the best way to have a site that's ready to go, so that we're responsive to development opportunities in the future. And finally, it doesn't preclude the option of putting the parking underground when we do future phases and future development as well as the option of thinking in a district term around parking, which we need to do downtown, and it may be a parking structure across the street where we have the quarter block. So it preserves the opportunity to think creatively and over time about parking. So I just really wanted to stress that it's not a one-time solution to the problem.
Are you ready for me to take it back now? So I want to be sure we get any questions people have, and you have one, I know. And the other point that I wanted to make, and not to be contrarian to anybody's points of view around the table, but I do want to offer the notion that we have committees and citizen groups that work on how we use art in our community, and it would probably be the least political and the best engagement of the community that we have our community folks engaged in what they might like to see in their city hall, knowing what we know. But it's just part of our cultural services and all of that kind of thing too. Just something to think about. Then we wouldn't all be putting our hands up and saying, "I like that piece." No, I don't like that piece. I think there's got to be a better way of going about this. So,
chaired by Art Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
I'd be happy to tell you what I think any day.
No, Claire, you have a question?
Yes, and I appreciate what you just said. I agree. I think we need larger input than just the city council about what pieces of art are going to be there. That seems right. I had a question about this kind of applies to the whole presentation, but specifically when you were speaking about the energy efficiency numbers. We're talking about, you tend to use the term building, but it's really a series of buildings. And so I wasn't sure if the 130 figure, the EUI, was the whole footprint of the building, or were you thinking of just the council chamber when you talked about that? So I just wanted a little more clarity about which building was being referred to in that part of the presentation.
Okay, the 130 referred to the existing city hall, the entire block, 80+ thousand square feet, in those years where it was fully or partially occupied. Now, of course, prior to the 7 years that were illustrated on the screen when fire and police were there, it was even greater than 130, more than likely. We don't have the data on that right now. But that refers to the existing city hall using the systems, essentially very little insulation, single pane glazing, so the energy you're spending to heat and cool the building is essentially going pretty quickly through the envelope to the atmosphere. So you're losing a lot of energy there, not using it wisely. The 30 refers to the target for the new facility, the building that we're showing here, the phase 1. So it does not include the future phases of development.
That makes sense.
But
Thank you.
The EUI metric, by using kilobTUs per square foot per year, it essentially normalizes. So it's looking at a number per square foot. So in a sense, the size of the facility isn't as relative because you're normalizing it to a single square foot metric. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And then just thinking about your comment, Mike, about the time, the fourth dimension, if we did go towards something like this with the surface lots and we really were setting ourselves up for a future building or project there, I think it would be important to have information out on site so someone visiting the site would understand that this was a phased project, so that we're still communicating that even though we might not be actively building or developing something.
Thank you. Is there a way that we would be able to have, say, a screen kind of in a curved way that would, periodically display the rather challenged mural that we had, as well as other art that would go in a kind of a revolving kind of situation, kind of like they do in ballparks these days with advertising.
A jumbotron.
Yeah. Not quite. I'm thinking something cooler than that. It could also possibly be used for presentations like this.
Yeah.
So that you could bring up the mural, have that revolving with other art that would be other murals that would be reflective of the city, and then when you need to, you can flip a switch or push a button and go into presentation mode.
An instant replay of council action?
In slow motion. In slow motion.
you said again?
Anybody else have a question? Yes, Colin.
Question, but I really like, I mentioned before when I met with you guys about the city history too. I think that I mentioned before the city history. I really like that idea too. Having celebrate that a little bit more. We don't do a very good job of that in all the things that we have in the cases and some of the history that we have. It's kind of a rich history that we should celebrate and have it be an educational part. I really like the idea of a water feature too. I think, Mike, I mentioned that many times before. And I'm okay with the parking being a surface lot for the time being. I understand that keeping the underground parking, maybe Mike, you can talk to this a little bit more, but keeping the underground parking as is presents you with some incredibly unique circumstances that would just blow the budget up now and in the future probably. That's what I'm thinking. And keeping it as a surface lot and bringing everything back down to grade is the most economical way to deal with it, and keeping and preserving it for redevelopment. Ease of redevelopment would be really important.
That's correct. And the consultants have looked at it, and retaining the problem is that it's partially below grade. And the closer you get to 7th, the less below grade it is. And so if you're going to maintain structured parking, you have to keep a deck that's still 10 feet above the ground. And we have to reinforce it seismically as well, most likely, just because it's still connected to the rest of the site and the building and so on. So it does create some pretty extreme challenges, and so getting everything down to grade and making the building accessible and visible from all sides was an important part of this as well. But yeah, cost was a big driver. I mean, we could do as many levels underground as you wanted.
Yeah, right.
With lots of money, but it's partially budget driven, and then like I said, it's partially a revenue driver. Even keeping some of the existing structure, it's still a money loser over time because of the maintenance that's required on structured parking, and then it's not development ready if we're leaving a part of the building there that still has to be demolished before they come back in and start new.
And structured parking's $35,000 a slot, kind of in that ballpark. Millions of dollars.
Above ground, yes.
Yeah,
below
right.
ground, it gets even
more
55,000. Yeah,
a slot, 55.
Something like that.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about the fact that the elevation gain from the north side of the building to the south side of the building, when you think about it, you're almost at grade when you come out the other side, but you're substantially below grade, so it's actually slanted, but it doesn't feel like that when you're in it.
So, Councilor Pulling, were you in line?
Yeah, thank you. I noticed in the sketches, and I know they're just conceptual, and we have to keep reminding people of that we seem to have lost the connectivity to the county building. Has there been any discussion as to whether we're going to, get rid of that idea, or are we going to continue that idea? Because I think it's another one of those symbolic things, but I think it's also very important that we're able to have that connectivity to the county and its governmental business also. And then the other thing, when I met with all you folks, I did bring up some security issues, and I know it's in the early stages, but I'd like to see that kind of investigated a little bit more and some ideas brought out a little bit, what you're thinking as far as what can or cannot be done. And I don't remember who brought up the idea of the vestibule, but that's a great place to have people move out of the council chambers. That's also a place that perhaps we can provide some locker space for backpacks and things, bringing them into the council chambers.
Councilor Pryor?
Thank you. This whole thing makes me very mindful of the fact that we're talking about, filming episode 1. And whenever you start filming episode 1, you always have to know what episode 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are going to have in them, because they're not disconnected. And so even though we're talking specifically about episode 1 here, I would really like to make sure we do talk about, the season, because this is all interconnected. And so, we're looking at things where we have a surface parking lot because we may or may not need the other piece, and this is an effective way to use that. And I kind of thought that's what that would be. But that's episode 1. And I would like to know if we are connecting that when we talk about interconnectivity. Are we connecting episode 1 to episode 2 and episode 3 and episode 4? So I don't think we want to kind of confine the conversation. I think we should have at least some level of conversation, even as we're filming episode 1. I think we should have some conversation about what the rest of the season might potentially be. And I know you roughed it with vague buildings, but I think I heard some comfort level around, do we want buildings that are taller than that or smaller than that? Could there be buildings that might be not entirely for city use? Could there be buildings that could be shared? Maybe as we get further into the season, to get to Councilor Polling's point, we may be talking about increasing, bringing more players into the season. And so there may be opportunities where we can have the city, the county, other folks, kind of expand our vision, be more evolutionary. I don't want us to be limited to just what we see and hear in episode 1 and say that was the whole thing. Gee, wasn't that great? There's a whole season that we get to watch here. And we get to watch it and enjoy it as it happens. This is just simply the first part. I'm excited about episode 1. But I'm also equally looking forward to the whole season, because I think once we're done, this is going to be great. It's going to be really fabulous. And so I want us to make sure that as we look at this, we don't look at this as the end. We simply look at it as the beginning. And that, for me, is one of the most exciting parts.
You don't want the season canceled.
Not mid-season, no. I don't want to be canceled after the pilot.
This could be a good moment for us to introduce two other members of, or two other, I should say, components or parts of our design team, because they relate to some of the questions that several of you have asked about. One is that we have brought onto our team a master artist as a sub-consultant to Raul Broca to be a part of our integrated design team. And essentially the goal with this is to be able to really put together some exciting and forward-thinking ideas about how art can help engage the public directly with the building. And that relates also to the fact that we've heard almost universally from the people that we've spoken with that changing exhibit space, connections to history through that exhibit space, gallery space, places to tell the story of Eugene, and places to engage a much broader demographic of the community than just people coming to pay parking tickets, is really a terrific goal of the project, and people get very excited hearing about that. So we're looking forward to developing those proposals and those ideas, working with Chris, who's actually here with us, from that perspective, and then also coming back to you with some of those exciting ideas. The other team member I wanted to mention is that we also are working with Leland Consulting on this project out of Portland. They're a development strategist, and we're having them essentially do some of that study of what the future episodes may hold and what future opportunities the city may be in control of as time goes on. And so we will be able to talk about that in more specificity in April, but there's interest and there's excitement around many different ways of thinking about what this block can contribute to downtown in the place that it is and the way that people engage with the City Hall and with the city. So those are both very exciting things, and we've heard a lot of great feedback around both.
Alan?
At the beginning, Mike, you mentioned that you had some cost estimates of different ways of doing it, and that retaining the existing building and rebuilding it was the most expensive. And can you talk about those different kind of layers of different options and what kind of cost you have?
Yeah, I prefer to go ahead and have the consultant team do that, because the cost consultant was part of their team.
Sure.
I guess a simple way to understand one of the dilemmas of the existing building is that it's 80,000+ square feet. If you you can't just reinforce part of it. It's all connected. So to bring it up to standard, then you're working on 80,000 square feet, more than 80,000 square feet. And then you start looking at, well, what would be a minimum standard of what you'd do with it? If you only need 20 to 25,000, what do you do with the rest of the square footage? And so we plugged in numbers of just bringing up the shell of that so that it would be could serve as a shell for future tenants, and that costs money. So you can just see how the dollars start adding up because you're dealing with a much bigger building. So if you step back from that and say, well, what if you just kept the parking and reinforced that? That's still a cost. You're investing quite a bit in reinforcing the structure, and that was a substantial sum just to keep the parking where it is. So when you compare that to really a much simpler version where you can, and we aren't even probing the idea of risk, because anytime you take on an existing building, you've got to have contingencies for the unknown, and so that creates another pot of money that you just have to have there because you know you're going to have discoveries along the way. So where we ended up, and we looked at a whole range of options from really trying very aggressively to reuse the building to looking at retaining the council chamber, but building new, was that we had a much more well-defined project. If you draw the circle around it, it's much smaller as a building. And yes, we have a whole site that we need to take care of and have. I appreciate the idea that, hey, we have to have interim ideas that are really strong, but they don't need to be expensive. They're not the same cost as making a building that not only just meets code, but our goal is to make a high-performance building. So I don't know if that, just describing how we were playing with and analyzing the cost, but we looked literally at a full range, at eight different options, and ran costs on them to really try to probe where were the costs coming from.
And if I could just add to that too, and one of the other drivers for the cost equation looking at the existing building is addressing the energy efficiency of the existing structure. As we were looking to try to move that number down from 130 even to the baseline of 75, obviously replacing a lot of the single pane glazing, addressing what we call a thermal bridge, which essentially when you look up from the parking, you've got that concrete waffle slab that obviously conducts the cold and the heat. So even if you develop new envelope at the above platform level at the enclosed spaces, you still have that thermal bridge. So even looking creatively with ways to create a new thermal envelope around that existing structure, again, when you multiplied that by 80,000 square feet versus the 20 that you really needed to accommodate, that really started to drive the costs for rehabilitating the existing structure up northwards of what we felt like we could do and really do a better job at building a new energy efficient envelope and structure.
I appreciate what you said about hearing what I said, but the question I have honestly is this, that I don't want us to settle for something without a real discussion. So to me, what's done with the space that we're not building on is like a whole nother discussion. I don't know whether it's a discussion with you, I don't know who's the discussion with, but I just want to be sure that we think that out carefully and not necessarily get it mixed up in this discussion in the same way. So whatever you guys bring forward to suggest, I just want us to be very thoughtful and not just kind of say, oh, well, that, okay. So, thank you very much. We appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Very much. Nice job.
Probably talked about your